October 23, 2016, 2:34 in the morning. A 911 call comes in from a residential neighborhood in Baltimore. A house is engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing into the night sky. One person inside, 23 years old, a medical student. By sunrise, firefighters find a charred body in what used to be the upstairs bedroom. By noon, the medical examiner confirms. Dental records match. Dorothy Crace is dead. Her mother, Margaret Crace, drives to the morgue 2 days later. Alone, she identifies her daughter's remains through personal effects. A necklace, a class ring. She buries a closed casket. She screams at a grave that holds something she can't unsee. She spends 8 years learning how to breathe through the kind of pain that has no name, the kind that comes from holding your child's charred hand one last time. And then, in a rural clinic in Honduras, providing care to underserved communities, Margaret sees a young doctor who moves exactly like her dead daughter. The doctor is wearing gloves, a surgical mask, treating patients with a technique Margaret recognizes. She was imagining if her daughter was alive, she might be saving lives now, fulfilling the dream they built together. Before she could turn her eyes away, the doctor removes her mask. Dorothy's face. Dorothy's eyes. Dorothy's grandmother's necklace around her neck. But before Margaret can speak, a man emerges from the back office. Dr. Vincent Holloway. Her ex-husband. Dorothy's stepfather. And in that moment, Margaret understands. The fire was a lie, the body was a stranger, and her family has been operating in the shadows for 8 years. Welcome to MAV Life Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Margaret Crace was born in 1969 in West Baltimore, a neighborhood where mothers worked 2 jobs and still came home smiling, where community meant something, where raising a child alone wasn't a scandal but a badge of survival. She became a single mother at 23 when Robert, Dorothy's biological father, died in a construction accident, a crane malfunction. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. So Margaret did what mothers do. She survived. Worked double shifts as an ER nurse. Night shift. Day shift, whatever kept the lights on. Whatever kept food on the table. Whatever gave Dorothy a chance at something better. Years passed like that. Work, sleep, Dorothy, repeat. Margaret had started nursing school before getting pregnant. Dropped out to raise her daughter. It haunted her. The dream of being a doctor, deferred, then abandoned. But she poured that dream into Dorothy instead. Straight A's. Science fairs. Pre-med track. Every scholarship application, every college tour, every late-night study session. Margaret was there. Then when Dorothy was 12, tragedy struck again. Margaret's mother passed from cancer. The woman who'd raised Margaret alone, who'd shown her how to survive, was gone. Margaret inherited one thing. Her mother's silver necklace, a family heirloom. She gave it to Dorothy on her 18th birthday. This survived everything our family went through. So will you. Dorothy got into Johns Hopkins for pre-med. Full scholarship. Margaret cried for an hour in the hospital break room. She'd done it. Given her daughter what she never had, a real shot at becoming a doctor. Then in her late 40s, Margaret's life changed. A hospital charity event. That's where she met Dr. Vincent Holloway. He was distinguished, confident, a prominent vascular surgeon. Knew how to listen, knew how to make her feel seen after years of being invisible. But more than that, he took interest in Dorothy. Mentored her during her medical school rotations. Gave her advice. Opened doors. They married in 2018, when Dorothy was 21. Vincent didn't legally adopt Dorothy, she was an adult, but he became her stepfather, her mentor, her champion. Margaret thought she'd finally done it. Given her daughter the stable home she'd always wanted, a father figure, security, professional connections. Dr. Vincent Holloway seemed like the answer to prayers Margaret didn't even know she was praying. Vincent Holloway was born in 1972 in Montgomery County, Maryland. Only child, the one who was given everything except affection. His parents weren't cruel, just clinical, emotional vacuums, the kind of people who provided Ivy League education but never attended a single graduation. So Vincent learned early how to get validation, how to read a room, how to say exactly what people needed to hear. He built a career in vascular surgery on that skill. Not just the technical brilliance but the bedside manner. The way he made patients feel like they were the only person in the world. Made excellent money, drove a Mercedes, had privileges at 3 hospitals. His colleagues would later say the same thing. Vincent always knew what you wanted to hear. Patients loved him. Administrators loved him. He was untouchable. But there were cracks. A malpractice suit in 2011, dismissed, but the patient's family claimed Vincent had operated while impaired. A complaint from a surgical resident in 2015 about inappropriate mentorship boundaries. Investigated, inconclusive. And money problems. Not gambling but a different kind of addiction. Medical tourism. Underground procedures. Cash payments from clients who couldn't go through normal channels. The kind of thing you hide behind a white coat and a god complex. But Margaret didn't know any of that. Not yet. Dorothy Crace, born 1993, spring baby. Margaret's whole world. She was brilliant, the kind of kid who won science fairs, who read medical journals for fun, who shadowed surgeons at 16. 4 years, it was just Margaret and Dorothy, 2 against the world. They had their own language, their own jokes, their own rhythm. Dorothy was close with her mother, told her everything, until she didn't. Around 21, something shifted. Dorothy started her surgical residency at Johns Hopkins. But by year 2, she was pulling away. Stopped calling as much. Stopped coming home for Sunday dinners. When she did visit, she seemed hollow. Thinner. Anxious. Her attending physicians would later recall it. Dorothy became withdrawn around her 2nd year, stopped engaging in rounds, started making mistakes. Her best friend from medical school noticed it too. She stopped talking about her future. It was always Vincent says this or Vincent thinks that. Like she didn't have her own opinions anymore. I asked her about it once. She just said it's complicated and changed the subject. If you looked through Dorothy's social media from that time, you could see it. Photos with Vincent start appearing constantly after the wedding. Surgical conferences, mentorship dinners. Then around mid-2016, something changes. The photos become more controlled. Dorothy dressed differently, more conservative. Her captions become shorter. And then in September 2016, she drops out of her residency. But Margaret thought it was normal. Young doctors burn out. They need space. They question their paths. That's just what they do, right? By late 2016, the distance between Dorothy and Margaret had grown into something Margaret couldn't ignore anymore. Dorothy barely answered calls, canceled visits, moved into a rental house alone claiming she needed space to figure things out. Margaret tried everything. Heart-to-heart talks, offering to pay for therapy, sending care packages. Nothing worked. Vincent noticed it too. Or at least he said he did. October 2016, Vincent came to Margaret with reassurance. This is normal. Residency broke her. She needs time. I'm keeping an eye on her, checking in. She'll come back to us. Just give her space. Margaret wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that the prestigious surgeon husband who'd mentored Dorothy, who'd opened every door for her, knew what was best. That one day, Dorothy would come back. That everything would be okay. She had no idea that Vincent was orchestrating something else entirely. Something that would destroy everything Margaret had built. Something that would cost Margaret 8 years of her life, her sanity, and the truth about her daughter's fate. October 23, 2016. The phone call that would change everything. Margaret Crace learned early that survival wasn't optional. When Robert died on that construction site in 2005, crushed under a fallen beam before Dorothy even made it to middle school, Margaret didn't have time to fall apart. She had a 12-year-old daughter who needed to eat, needed clothes, needed to believe the world wasn't ending even though it felt like it was. So she worked. Double shifts at Baltimore General's emergency room. 16-hour days that blurred into each other. Christmas morning started with a 6 a.m. shift. Dorothy's birthday parties happened between day shift and night shift. Margaret showing up in scrubs with grocery store cake and a smile that cost everything she had left. Other nurses asked how she did it. Margaret didn't have an answer. You just do. You survive because your child needs you to. The dream of becoming a doctor herself had died years ago, buried under student loans she couldn't finish paying and a pregnancy that arrived during her second year of nursing school. She'd dropped out, taken the ER job, and never looked back. But that dream didn't disappear. It just transferred. Dorothy would be the doctor Margaret never got to be. And Dorothy was brilliant. Science fairs. Perfect grades. AP classes. Early acceptance to Johns Hopkins pre-med program. Full scholarship. When the letter arrived, Margaret stood in their tiny kitchen and cried so hard she couldn't breathe. She'd done it. Against every odds stacked against them, she'd given her daughter a real shot. Medical school was harder. The loans were crushing even with scholarships. Margaret picked up extra shifts, sold her car, moved to a smaller apartment. Whatever it took. Dorothy would graduate debt-free if Margaret had to kill herself making it happen. That's how she met Vincent Holloway. Spring 2017. He was a visiting vascular surgeon, brought in for a complex aneurysm repair. Margaret assisted on the procedure, handed him instruments, watched him work with the kind of precision that looked like art. After the surgery, he thanked her by name. Asked about her daughter when he saw Dorothy's medical school acceptance letter as Margaret's phone wallpaper. She's pre-med at Hopkins, Margaret said, surprised he'd asked. Surgeons didn't usually notice nurses as people. Hopkins, Vincent repeated, impressed. Smart kid. If she ever needs guidance, tell her to reach out. I remember how overwhelming medical school can be. He gave Margaret his card. She tucked it away, didn't think much of it. But when Dorothy started her surgical rotations a year later, Margaret mentioned it. Vincent remembered. Started mentoring Dorothy. Coffee meetings. Advice on residency programs. Letters of recommendation. He opened doors Margaret couldn't even see. So when Vincent asked her to dinner in late 2017, Margaret said yes. He was 45, distinguished, stable. Everything Robert hadn't been. Everything Margaret thought she needed. They married quickly. Courthouse ceremony in February 2018. Dorothy was 21, finishing medical school. Vincent didn't adopt her formally, but he became her stepfather, her mentor, her champion. Margaret thought she'd finally made it. The struggling single mother who'd clawed her way up from nothing had given her daughter a father figure, professional connections, security. She could finally breathe. But small things started changing. Dorothy called less. Stopped coming to Sunday dinners. When they did meet, she seemed quieter. Thinner. She dressed differently too, more conservative. Buttoned-up blouses instead of the casual clothes she used to wear. When Margaret mentioned it, Dorothy just shrugged. Vincent says presentation matters in medicine. Margaret wanted to push back, but maybe Vincent was right. Maybe this was Dorothy growing up, becoming professional. Margaret wanted to believe everything was fine. That her daughter was just busy, stressed, adjusting to the demands of becoming a surgeon. That the distance was normal. She wanted to believe it right up until the night Dorothy's house burned down. July 2016. Dorothy called from the hospital at 2 a.m., voice shaking. I can't do this anymore, Mama. I can't. Margaret sat up in bed, heart pounding. Can't do what? Dorothy, what happened? Residency. Surgery. All of it. I'm drowning. Margaret drove to the hospital, found Dorothy in the residence lounge, still in scrubs, eyes red and hollow. They sat in Margaret's car for 2 hours while Dorothy cried about impossible hours, attending physicians who screamed, patients dying despite her best efforts. Margaret held her daughter and promised it would get better. First year was always the hardest. But it didn't get better. 3 weeks later, Dorothy quit. Just walked away from the surgical residency program she'd worked her entire life to achieve. Margaret felt the news like a physical blow. Hopkins didn't just let people back in. This was Dorothy's career, her future, everything they'd sacrificed for. Vincent was calm when Margaret called him frantic. "It's more common than you think," he said. "Residency breaks people. She needs time to find herself, figure out what she really wants. Pushing her will only make it worse. But she's throwing away everything. She's saving herself, Margaret. Trust me. I've seen dozens of residents burn out. The ones who push through anyway end up broken." Dorothy's smart to step back. Margaret wanted to believe him. He was the surgeon, the mentor. He'd been through this world. Maybe he knew something she didn't. When Dorothy announced she was moving into a rental house across town, Margaret felt the distance growing wider. "I need my own space," Dorothy said, not meeting her eyes. "Vincent thinks it's important for me to learn independence." Margaret tried to visit, called ahead, brought Dorothy's favorite foods, showed up with flowers. But Dorothy canceled more often than not. "I'm tired, Mama. Can we do it another time?" Another time became next month, became maybe at Christmas. The rare occasions they did meet, Dorothy looked like a stranger. She'd lost at least 15 pounds, her cheekbones sharp, her eyes constantly darting to her phone. She jumped at sudden sounds. When Margaret reached across the table to squeeze her hand, Dorothy flinched. "Baby, you need to talk to someone. A therapist. This isn't just residency stress." Dorothy pulled her hand back. "Vincent is helping me. Vincent isn't a therapist. He understands medicine. He understands what I'm going through. He says traditional therapy is just people projecting their own issues onto you." Dorothy's voice had an edge Margaret didn't recognize. "He says I need to figure out my own path, not let other people tell me who I should be." The words sounded rehearsed, like Dorothy was repeating something she'd been told, not something she believed. Margaret tried a different approach. "What about your loans? Your apartment? How are you managing without the residency stipend?" "Vincent is helping with that too. He's managing my accounts so I don't have to stress about money while I figure things out." Red flags Margaret should have seen. A 23-year-old medical school graduate letting her stepfather control her finances, isolating herself from her mother, parroting someone else's opinions like they were her own. But Margaret was so desperate to believe Dorothy was okay, that this was just a phase, that Vincent was helping, that she ignored every instinct screaming something was wrong. "You wouldn't understand," Dorothy said when Margaret pushed. "You're not a doctor. You don't know what it's like." That hurt more than anything else. After everything Margaret had sacrificed, after every double shift and missed birthday and sold possession to pay for Dorothy's education, her daughter looked at her and said she didn't understand. Vincent said the same thing later when Margaret expressed concern. "Medical training is brutal, Margaret. It changes people. Dorothy needs space from expectations right now. Even maternal ones. Especially maternal ones." So Margaret backed off. Gave Dorothy space she thought her daughter needed. Space that turned into a chasm she couldn't cross. 3 months later, Dorothy's house burned down with her inside. The phone rang at 2:34 a.m. Margaret knew before she answered. Nothing good comes from a call at that hour. "Mrs. Holloway. This is Baltimore Fire Department. There's been an incident at 847 Woodlawn Avenue. Your daughter's residence. You need to come now." Margaret drove through red lights, still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it. She smelled the smoke before she saw the house. Black columns rising into the October sky, orange flames eating through the roof. Fire trucks everywhere, hoses spraying, neighbors in robes watching from their yards. She tried to run toward the house. A firefighter caught her. "Ma'am, you can't go in there. My daughter's inside." "Dorothy. She's inside." His face told her everything before his words did. "We're doing everything we can." They made her wait in a patrol car. She watched them battle the fire for 3 hours. Watched the roof collapse. Watched the windows blow out. Watched her daughter's home become ash. The fire marshal found her at sunrise. "We recovered a body from the upstairs bedroom. I'm sorry." The medical examiner's office smelled like chemicals and death. A detective led Margaret to a metal table covered with evidence bags. Personal effects, he called them. The necklace, her mother's silver heirloom, blackened but intact. Dorothy's medical school class ring, the sapphire cracked from heat. A wallet with Dorothy's ID, the photo melted. Dental records confirm identity, the detective said gently. It's her. Can I see her? The words came out before Margaret could stop them. The detective exchanged looks with the medical examiner. Mrs. Holloway, in cases of severe burns, sometimes it's better to remember. I need to see my daughter. They led her to another room. Pulled back a sheet. Margaret's knees buckled. The detective caught her, but she couldn't look away. Couldn't unsee what fire does to human flesh. The charred skin, the exposed bone, the way Dorothy's hand, her beautiful surgeon's hand, was curled into a claw. But the necklace was around her neck. The ring on her finger. Dorothy's height. Dorothy's build. Is this your daughter? Margaret nodded because her voice wouldn't work. The funeral was 4 days later. Closed casket. Margaret stood at Greenlawn Cemetery, staring at the polished mahogany box that held what was left of Dorothy. 23 years old. An entire life reduced to ash. Vincent stood beside her in a black suit, holding her elbow when she swayed. But something was off. He didn't cry. Didn't break. During the service, his phone buzzed 3 times. He stepped away to take a call, came back composed, apologetic. At the reception, he left early. Emergency surgery, he said, kissing Margaret's cheek. I'm so sorry. At the cemetery after everyone left, Margaret collapsed onto the grass beside the fresh grave. The screaming started then. Not crying, screaming. Animal sounds she didn't know she could make. Her sister Lorraine tried to pull her up, but Margaret clawed at the dirt. Something's wrong, she gasped between screams. Something's wrong, Lorraine. This isn't right. I know, baby. I know it hurts. No. Margaret looked up at her sister. Dirt under her fingernails, grass stains on her black dress. Something about this is wrong. The fire. Vincent. Dorothy she wouldn't just. But she couldn't articulate it. Couldn't explain the feeling crawling under her skin that this was wrong, all wrong, that she was missing something crucial. So she just screamed until her voice gave out, until Lorraine and 2 other relatives physically carried her to the car. Margaret didn't know it then, but she was right. Something was wrong. Dorothy wasn't in that grave. Dorothy was on a plane to Guatemala with forged documents and her stepfather's blood money, leaving her mother to bury a stranger and spend the next 8 years drowning in a lie. Vincent moved into the guest room the night they came home from the funeral. I can't sleep in our bed, he said, not meeting Margaret's eyes. Every time I close my eyes, I see her. I see Dorothy. Margaret understood. She saw Dorothy everywhere too. In the empty chair at breakfast. In the hallway mirror. In every dark-haired young woman on the street. Grief was a haunting they'd have to survive together. Except Vincent wasn't surviving with her. He was disappearing. He left for the hospital before dawn, came home after midnight, ate dinner in his study with the door closed. When Margaret tried to talk about Dorothy, tried to share memories or cry together, he'd stiffen. I can't do this right now, Margaret. I'm barely holding it together. But he looked fine. Showered, shaved, suit pressed. Meanwhile, Margaret couldn't get out of bed most days. Couldn't eat. Couldn't stop calling the fire marshal. Mrs. Holloway, we've been over this, Fire Marshal Davis said on her 6th call. Old wiring, space heater too close to curtains. It was an accident. A terrible accident. But Dorothy was careful. She wouldn't. People make mistakes. I'm sorry for your loss, but there's nothing else to investigate. Vincent found her on the phone one night, demanding they recheck the scene. He took the phone from her hand, hung it up. You need to stop this, Margaret. You're making it worse. You're not letting yourself heal. Something doesn't add up. The fire started at 2 a.m. Why was Dorothy even awake? Why didn't she get out? Because fires kill people, Margaret. Because smoke inhalation happens fast. Because our daughter is dead and calling the fire marshal every day won't bring her back. The coldness in his voice made her flinch. This wasn't grief. This was something else. 8 weeks after the funeral, a process server knocked on the door. Divorce papers. Irreconcilable differences. Vincent cited Margaret's inability to move forward and obsessive behavior regarding the fire investigation as reasons the marriage had become untenable. Margaret's lawyer, Elena Rodriguez, read through the documents with increasing confusion. He's waiving all claims to the house, the joint accounts, everything. He just wants out. Fast. Margaret, this is unusual. Most divorces take months of negotiation. He's basically walking away from $250,000 in assets. Maybe he just can't handle being around me. Around the grief. Elena looked up from the papers. Or maybe he doesn't want you looking too closely at his finances. But Margaret was too shattered to care about money. She signed the papers without reading them. 2 weeks later, Vincent was gone. No forwarding address. Disconnected cell phone. His privileges at Baltimore General quietly terminated. Just vanished like he'd never existed. Margaret kept calling the fire marshal. Kept pushing. Davis finally told her bluntly. Dental records matched, Mrs. Holloway. Your daughter's dental records. That's scientific proof. I understand you're grieving, but you need to accept what happened and get help. What Margaret didn't know, what wouldn't be discovered until 8 years later when federal investigators dug into Vincent's past, was how methodically he'd planned it. How he'd accessed the hospital morgue on 3 separate occasions in September 2016, each time after midnight when security was minimal. How he'd found a Jane Doe, a young black woman, approximate age and build, unidentified overdose victim. How he'd entered the morgue database and swapped the dental records, replacing Jane Doe's file with Dorothy's scans from her last cleaning 6 months prior. How he'd kept the Jane Doe's body preserved, waiting. How he'd set the fire himself, placing the body in Dorothy's bed, staging the scene. How he'd made sure the fire was hot enough to destroy fingerprints, facial features, anything that couldn't be verified by dental records he'd already falsified. The necklace was easy. He'd bought a replica months before. The class ring he'd had made using photos. Plant the jewelry, plant the body, burn away the evidence. By the time Margaret was screaming at an empty grave, Dorothy was already in Central America. And Vincent was erasing every trace of his existence in Baltimore, preparing to join her. April 2017. Margaret sat on her bathroom floor with a bottle of sleeping pills and a glass of water. 50 pills. The pharmacist had looked at her strangely when she filled the prescription, but Margaret said she was stocking up. Easier than refilling every month. She counted them out. Thought about Dorothy. Thought about how much easier it would be to just stop breathing, stop hurting, stop seeing her daughter's charred hand every time she closed her eyes. She took the first pill. Then the second. Then 10 more before her hands started shaking so badly she dropped the bottle. Lorraine found her 3 hours later, unconscious on the tile. The ambulance. The stomach pump. The 72-hour psychiatric hold. Margaret woke up in the same hospital where she'd worked for 20 years, restrained to a bed, a psychiatrist asking if she had a plan to harm herself. My daughter burned to death, Margaret said. I held her body. I can't make it stop. Complicated grief with PTSD, they wrote in her chart. Prescribed medication. Recommended intensive therapy. Discharged her to Lorraine's care with instructions to remove all potential means of self-harm from her home. She couldn't go back to the ER after that. Couldn't handle the trauma bays anymore. The first burn victim who came through after she returned, a child who'd pulled a pot of boiling water off the stove, Margaret froze. Just stood there staring while other nurses rushed past her. Supervisor found her in the supply closet hyperventilating 20 minutes later. They moved her to a community clinic. Routine checkups, blood pressure screenings, flu shots. Safe work for broken people. Margaret took the demotion without argument. But she couldn't let Dorothy go. She hired a private investigator with money from the divorce settlement. Frank Morris, retired Baltimore PD, came highly recommended. He worked the case for 3 months. Interviewed neighbors, pulled fire reports, checked Dorothy's bank records for the weeks before her death. Found nothing unusual. Normal purchases. Normal patterns. No indication of foul play. Sometimes fires are just fires, Mrs. Crace. I'm sorry. Margaret joined a support group for parents who'd lost children. Sat in a church basement every Thursday night listening to other people's tragedies, wondering if their pain felt like hers. If they also saw their children's bodies when they tried to sleep. Year 3, she sat with another bottle of pills. This time she didn't take them. Just held them for 6 hours, weighing whether Dorothy would want this for her. Whether joining her daughter was love or cowardice. Lorraine found her at dawn, still sitting there, bottle unopened. You're moving in with me, Lorraine said. Not a question. An order. What Margaret didn't know, what she wouldn't discover until years later when federal investigators finally dug into Vincent's trail, was that all the evidence was there. Bank records showing Vincent transferred $180,000 to Cayman Island accounts in September 2016, 3 weeks before the fire. Hospital security footage showing him accessing the morgue at 2:47 a.m., 3:12 a.m., 3:38 a.m. on 3 separate nights. Badge logs that placed him in areas he had no medical reason to be. And Dorothy's laptop, which Margaret had packed away in a box with her daughter's other belongings. Too painful to look at. Too painful to turn on and see Dorothy's desktop background, her files, her search history. If Margaret had opened it, she would have seen the searches from September 2016. Creating new identity, living off-grid, countries without extradition, how to disappear completely. But the laptop sat in a box in Margaret's closet for 8 years. Evidence of a conspiracy Margaret was too broken to see. Proof that her daughter hadn't died in that fire. That Vincent had orchestrated everything. That the body in that grave was a stranger. The truth was there the whole time. Margaret just couldn't bear to look. Year 4, Margaret started seeing Dr. Elena Santos, a trauma therapist who specialized in parental grief. Elena didn't try to fix her or rush her healing. She just sat with Margaret in the pain, week after week, letting her cry and rage and remember without judgment. You're not trying to move on, Elena said during one session. You're trying to move forward. There's a difference. Moving on suggests leaving Dorothy behind. Moving forward means bringing her with you. It was the first thing anyone had said that made sense. Year 5, they finally found the right medication combination. The SSRI that didn't make her numb, the sleep aid that didn't leave her groggy. Margaret started having days where she didn't think about the fire every waking moment. Where she could eat a full meal. Where she could see a young black woman on the street and not immediately think it should have been Dorothy. She started reading Dorothy's medical school textbooks. Pathophysiology. Surgical technique. Anatomy atlases with Dorothy's highlighter marks still visible in the margins. It hurt, but it also felt like keeping her daughter alive. Like honoring the Dr. Dorothy never got to become. A volunteer coordinator at the community clinic mentioned they needed nurses for a free health fair. Margaret signed up. Then another. Then a weekly shift at a homeless clinic. The work felt right. Providing care to people who couldn't afford it, who fell through the cracks. The people Dorothy would have wanted to serve. Year 6. Margaret found Medical Mercy International online, a nonprofit providing healthcare to underserved communities in developing countries. 2-week missions, all expenses paid. Just bring your skills and your heart. Margaret applied for a mission to Guatemala. Got accepted. Spent 2 weeks in rural villages providing basic care, wound treatment, prenatal checkups, childhood vaccinations. It was the first time since the fire that Margaret felt useful. Like her nursing skills mattered. Like she was doing something Dorothy would be proud of. She went on another mission 3 months later. Then another. Honduras, El Salvador, Haiti, Kenya. Every few months, Margaret would pack her medical bag and disappear into communities that needed her. The work was hard, limited supplies, language barriers, heartbreaking poverty. But it gave her purpose. You're different, Lorraine said after the Kenya trip. Lighter somehow. Margaret wasn't happy. She'd never be happy again, not the way she was before. But she was functional. She was surviving. She'd accepted that she'd never know why Dorothy had been so withdrawn those last months. Why the fire happened. Why Vincent left so quickly. She'd made peace with the lack of closure, with the unanswered questions that would haunt her forever. Year 8, Medical Mercy assigned her to a 3-month mission in rural Honduras. Extended placement, working with a mobile clinic that served mountain villages. Margaret said yes without hesitation. 3 months away from Baltimore, from the memories, from the grave she still visited every Sunday. She arrived in Tegucigalpa in late October 2024. The team was small. 2 doctors, 3 nurses, a logistics coordinator. They traveled village to village in a beat-up van, setting up temporary clinics in community centers and churches. Basic care, treating infections, setting broken bones, teaching nutrition and hygiene. Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Peace. Not happiness. Not healing. But a quiet acceptance that this was her life now. Serving others in Dorothy's name. Honoring the dream her daughter never got to fulfill. She was helping people. She was surviving. That was enough. Then on a supply run to a regional clinic in the mountains, Margaret saw a young doctor whose hands moved exactly like Dorothy's. And 8 years of fragile peace shattered in an instant. November 2024. The mobile clinic team had been working a mountain village for 3 days when their supply coordinator, Carlos, announced they needed to make a run. Regional clinic about an hour east. They have the antibiotics we need, surgical supplies. Well-funded operation, treats some of the special patients in the area. Margaret volunteered to go. The drive would be a break from the relentless heat and the line of patients that never seemed to end. The clinic sat behind concrete walls with security cameras mounted at intervals. Guards stationed at the gate. Carlos showed credentials, they were waved through. Inside, the facility looked nothing like the rural clinics Margaret had been working. Modern equipment. Climate control. Floors that gleamed. This was private medicine, the kind wealthy patients paid cash for. Wait here, Carlos said, heading to the supply office. Might take a while. They're particular about documentation. Margaret wandered the hallway, noting the surgical suites, the recovery rooms. Through an observation window, she saw a surgery in progress. A young doctor bent over a patient, suturing with careful precision. Margaret had spent 20 years in ERs watching surgeons work, but something about this doctor's hands caught her attention. The way she held the forceps. Angled slightly right. Thumb positioned just so. It was a distinctive grip, technically correct but unusual. Margaret had watched Dorothy practice that exact technique at their kitchen table, using spare surgical tools borrowed from the med school, working on chicken breasts and orange peels until the motion was muscle memory. Margaret moved closer to the window, heart beginning to pound. The doctor tilted her head, concentrating on a difficult stitch. That head tilt. Dorothy used to do that same motion when she was thinking hard, even as a child doing homework. And her foot. The doctor was tapping her foot in a steady rhythm. Dorothy's nervous habit during stressful moments. The surgery concluded. The doctor stepped back, letting an assistant close. She reached up to remove her surgical mask. Margaret's breath stopped. The face was older, sharper angles. Different hairstyle pulled back severely. But the eyes, brown with gold flecks. Her grandmother's eyes passed down through generations. The bone structure. The small scar on the left eyebrow from when Dorothy fell off her bike at age 7. Dorothy. Her daughter. Her dead daughter. Standing 20 feet away, alive. The doctor removed her gloves, dropping them in a waste bin. As she did, her surgical gown shifted, revealing what hung at her throat, a silver necklace. Margaret's mother's heirloom. The one that had supposedly survived the fire. The one that had been around the corpse's neck in the morgue. Margaret's hand went to the observation window, palm pressing against glass. Her mouth opened to call out, to scream her daughter's name, but no sound came. The surgical suite door opened. A man in scrubs walked in, carrying a tablet, discussing something with Dorothy. He turned toward the window to point at a monitor. Dr. Vincent Holloway. Older, graying at the temples, but unmistakable. Margaret's knees buckled. She grabbed the window frame to keep from falling. Her vision tunneled. Sound muted except for the blood rushing in her ears. Dorothy was alive. Vincent was with her. They were working together in some private clinic in Honduras. 8 years after Margaret buried an empty casket. 8 years after she held a charred corpse and identified it as her daughter. 8 years of grief, of suicide attempts, of clawing her way back to something resembling a life. All of it was a lie. Through the window, Vincent said something. Dorothy laughed. They looked comfortable together. Familiar. Like partners who'd worked side by side for years. Because they had been. While Margaret was drowning, they were here. Living. Working. Free. Carlos's voice behind her. Mrs. Crace? You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Margaret turned to him, and whatever he saw in her face made him step back. I have, she whispered. Margaret told Carlos she was sick, needed to rest at the vehicle. Instead, she watched. Waited. An hour later, Dorothy and Vincent emerged from the clinic, walking to a black SUV in the parking lot. Margaret memorized the license plate, watched them drive toward the mountains. Back at the mobile clinic that night, she told the team leader she needed personal time. Family emergency. Could they spare her for a few days? He agreed reluctantly. Margaret hired a local guide, Luis, showing him the license plate photo. I need to find where this vehicle goes. I'll pay well. Luis knew the area. That's the Holloway Clinic. Private facility up in the mountains. Very exclusive. Armed security. They treat patients who pay cash, no questions asked. Margaret gave him $500 American. Take me there. They staked out the compound from a distance. Margaret watched through binoculars for 2 days. Armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Black SUVs arriving with passengers who looked wrong. Expensive suits, expensive watches. Faces that belonged to men used to getting what they wanted through violence. Dorothy moving between the clinic and residential quarters. Vincent doing the same. They lived there. This wasn't just where they worked. This was their home. On the 3rd day, Margaret saw Dorothy walk alone into a garden area behind the clinic. Small courtyard with plants, a bench. No guards in immediate sight. Margaret moved before she could think. Climbed the perimeter wall where Luis showed her the security cameras had a blind spot. Dropped into the compound, walked straight to the garden. Dorothy was sitting on the bench, reading a medical journal. She looked up at the sound of footsteps. Their eyes met. All color drained from Dorothy's face. The journal slipped from her hands. She stood slowly, mouth opening but no sound coming out. Mama. The word broke Margaret. 8 years of grief, of rage, of questions poured out in a strangled sound that wasn't quite a scream. She crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. Dorothy flinched back, hands raised. Please, I can explain. You're dead. I buried you. I held your body. That wasn't me. Dorothy's voice cracked. Tears streaming now. Mama, that wasn't me. It was. Vincent found a body. 8 years. Margaret's voice shook. I tried to kill myself twice. Did you know that? Did you know what you did to me? Dorothy collapsed to her knees, sobbing. I wanted to come back. I wanted to tell you. But Vincent said, he said they'd kill us. He said they'd kill you if I tried to leave. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? Margaret's laugh was bitter. From what? From this. Dorothy gestured at the compound. From him. From the people he works with. Mama, this isn't a medical clinic. We treat cartel members. War criminals. People who can't go to hospitals because they're wanted. Vincent convinced me we'd be saving lives outside the corrupt system. That traditional medicine was broken. But it's not noble. It's monsters paying for surgery so they can keep being monsters. The words came faster now. 8 years of secrets spilling out. How Vincent had groomed her, isolated her. Convinced her that her mother didn't understand the higher calling of medicine. How he'd presented the escape plan as liberation. Fake her death, start fresh, run a clinic serving people the system failed. How Dorothy had believed it until she arrived and saw the first patient, a man with bullet wounds who bragged about the family he'd killed. I tried to leave. Vincent said the cartels would hunt me down. That they'd find you first to punish me. That I'd gotten you killed by even thinking about running. So I stayed. I performed surgery on rapists and murderers and told myself I was honoring my oath to do no harm. But I was doing harm, Mama. Every day, I was helping evil men live to hurt more people. Dorothy looked up, mascara running, looking more like the frightened girl Margaret remembered than the composed doctor she'd been performing surgery an hour ago. I kept the necklace. Grandma's necklace. Vincent didn't know I had it. I wore it hidden under my scrubs every single day because it was the only piece of you I had left. The only proof that I was still Dorothy Crace and not whoever he'd turned me into. Margaret stared at her daughter. This stranger wearing Dorothy's face, Dorothy's hands, Dorothy's grandmother's necklace. Alive. Trapped. Lost. Where is he now? Dorothy's eyes went wide. Mama, no. You need to leave. If Vincent finds you here. Where is he? The voice behind them answered. Right here. Vincent stepped into the garden. 2 armed guards flanking him. His smile was cold. Hello, Margaret. I have to say, I didn't expect you to track us down. That's rather impressive. He nodded to the guards. Take them both inside. We need to have a family conversation. The guards brought them to Vincent's office. Clean, modern, medical journals on shelves beside bottles of expensive scotch. Vincent dismissed the guards with a wave, closed the door. When he turned back to Margaret and Dorothy, the charming surgeon mask was gone. What remained was cold calculation. I have to admit, Margaret, I'm impressed. 8 years and you finally figured it out. Most people would have accepted the death certificate and moved on. He poured himself a drink. Then again, you never were good at accepting things, were you? Always pushing, always questioning. That's why I had to leave so quickly after the fire. You killed someone. Margaret's voice shook. You burned an innocent woman's body and let me think it was my daughter. Vincent shrugged. Jane Doe from the hospital morgue. Overdose victim, no family, no identification. She was going to be cremated anyway. I just gave her body purpose. He sipped his scotch. The dental records were the tricky part. Hospital database access. Timing the swap perfectly. But I've always been meticulous. You're a monster. I'm a businessman. This operation generates $5 million annually. Cartel leaders, war criminals, fugitives. They all need medical care they can't get through official channels. They pay extraordinarily well. He gestured at Dorothy. And your daughter has been an excellent investment. Hopkins-trained surgeon, steady hands, doesn't ask too many questions anymore. Dorothy's voice was small. You said we were helping people. We are. People who pay. Vincent's smile was reptilian. Though I'll admit, Dorothy, you've become a bit of a liability. Too much conscience. Too many questions lately about our patient list. I've been considering my exit strategy, and unfortunately, you know too much to be left behind. Margaret stepped between them. You're not touching her. That's sweet, Margaret. Maternal instinct never dies, does it? Vincent set down his glass. But you see, now I have a bigger problem. I can't let you leave. You'll go straight to the authorities, expose everything. So I'm afraid this reunion will have to be permanent. He pulled a gun from his desk drawer. Dorothy screamed, lunged at Vincent. He backhanded her across the face, sent her sprawling, aimed the gun at her. I'm sorry, Dorothy. You were brilliant, but... Margaret grabbed the nearest object, a metal surgical tray on the side table, and swung it at Vincent's head. The impact sent him staggering. The gun wavered. They fought. Vincent was stronger, younger, but Margaret was desperate. She clawed at his face, kicked, bit. Dorothy recovered, threw herself at Vincent's legs. He fell, the gun skittering across the floor. Margaret scrambled for it. Her fingers closed around cold metal. Vincent lunged at her. Margaret raised the gun, pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the small office. Vincent looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, then up at Margaret with genuine surprise. You He collapsed, gasping. Blood pooled beneath him. Dorothy was on her feet, shaking. Oh God! Oh God, Mama, what did you? We need to leave. Now. He's dying. We need to. He was going to kill us both. Margaret grabbed Dorothy's arm. We need to go. Sirens in the distance. Not police, vehicles approaching the compound. Dorothy's face went white. The Mendoza shipment. High-ranking cartel leader scheduled for surgery tonight. If they find us here, find Vincent dead. Is there another way out? Dorothy nodded. Service path through the jungle. Staff use it for supply runs. This way. They ran. Behind them, voices shouting in Spanish, discovering Vincent's body. Margaret was 56, out of shape, lungs burning. Dorothy pulled her forward, through a service gate, into dense jungle. Branches tore at Margaret's skin. Her chest felt like it would explode. Dorothy half-carried her, navigating by memory through darkness, following a path Margaret couldn't see. Hours later, or maybe minutes, Margaret had lost all sense of time. They emerged onto a road. Dorothy flagged down a truck. Explained in rapid Spanish. The driver looked terrified but agreed to take them to Tegucigalpa, the U.S. Embassy. Dorothy told them everything. The clinic, the cartel patients, Vincent's operation. Federal agents took statements. Made calls. Dorothy would testify, they said. Witness protection. New identity. New life. An agent pulled Margaret aside. You can enter protection with her. We can relocate you both. Margaret looked at Dorothy across the room, wrapped in a blanket, looking small and broken. Her daughter. Alive. But not the Dorothy she'd raised. That girl died 8 years ago, replaced by someone Margaret didn't know. No, Margaret said. She needs to rebuild herself. I need to process what happened. We can't do that together. The goodbye at the embassy was brief. Dorothy crying, Margaret numb. I'm sorry, Mama. For everything. I know. I love you. I know that too. 6 months later, Margaret was back at the Baltimore Community Clinic, taking blood pressures, giving flu shots, existing. A postcard arrived, no return address, postmarked from somewhere in the Midwest. I'm studying medicine again. Real medicine this time. Thank you for finding me. D. Margaret put it on her fridge next to Dorothy's medical school acceptance letter from Johns Hopkins. 12 years between the two pieces of paper. A lifetime of grief and lies and survival. Dorothy was alive. That would have to be enough. Thank you for staying this long. If you loved the story and want to hear more stories like this, please like and subscribe.